Hi, everyone. Welcome to our channel. In a statement, Douglas Macgregor discussed an incident involving altered grenade launchers that were reportedly sent as gifts from a Ukrainian chief of police to his Polish counterpart. According to Macgregor, the launchers were modified with one intended for use as a speaker on a stereo system. The purpose of the second launcher remains
unknown into Ukrainian side.
After sending, the launchers later expressed concerns about the potential modifications. Subsequently, a live grenade was discovered in one of the devices, leading to speculation about whether the explosion was accidental or intentional. The incident raises questions about how such a dangerous item could have crossed the border undetected, given the historical tensions between Poles and Ukrainians. Macgregor acknowledged that the situation could reopen old wounds for discussion. The nature of the incident, whether intentional or accidental, remains unclear, with no conclusive answers available at this time. Fortunately, there were no serious injuries reported, with the Polish chief of police reportedly sustaining only modest scratches. In an upcoming op-ed for the American Conservative, I delve into the statements made by the Deputy Polish Minister of Defense, who on November 29 warned of the escalating intensity of the war and the potential involvement of Poland. The minister hinted at the possibility of mobilization and various other implications for the future. Recently, a source has informed us that the Polish government is considering the mobilization of 200,000 troops next year, adding to the disconcerting nature of the situation. It's noteworthy that within the NATO alliance, Poland stands somewhat isolated in its eagerness for a robust stance against Russia, with minimal support from other members, aside from the Romanians.
Perhaps one might assume that Poland is
attempting to lay the groundwork for a meeting with the United States, seeking diverse forms of assistance, and potentially persuading the U.S. and other coalition partners to intervene. This development is deeply troubling, as President Biden has consistently emphasized that direct military engagement with Russia is not on the table. Nevertheless, recent events suggest a potential shift toward a military confrontation. A scenario that Poland seemingly would not entirely oppose poses a significant risk when aligning with a smaller state, as it tends to leverage the alliance for its own strategic gains. Contrary to previous information indicating 194,000 effective personnel, the latest data suggests that Poland might be considering mobilizing 200,000 combat-ready troops. The article highlights the minister's acknowledgement of an additional 500,000 individuals in uniform, albeit not all equipped for frontline duty, encompassing roles in law enforcement, paramilitary, and various other non-combat capacities. This admission provides insights into the considerable casualties suffered by the Ukrainians. Certainly in his recent statements, it appears that both he and President Zelensky are well aware of the formidable Russian force gathering with its significant firepower, including standoff and direct attack capabilities. He candidly acknowledges the potential strength of the Russian attacks and the vulnerability of their own forces.
emphasizing the urgency of the situation in
The article, he implies that the decision to continue fighting is contingent on the assistance provided by Washington. The tone suggests that they've consistently sought support, and now the responsibility lies with the United States to decide the course of action. Despite initially encouraging them to resist, there's an acknowledgement that there might be a point where it no longer makes sense to continue the fight. Regarding the rapport between him and his counterpart in Moscow, it is unclear, but there seems to be a suggestion that any communication has been somewhat illusory. While there might be some level of understanding, the depth and effectiveness of these exchanges are challenging to evaluate. On the other hand, it's noted that Zelensky, in contrast, has been a persistent advocate for the war, presenting himself as Washington's point person on the ground leading the charge against Moscow. The implication is that Zelensky, having made bold statements, is now committed to maintaining a resolute stance, making any retreat difficult. In the current situation, we find ourselves in what I would describe as the twilight zone judge. It's uncertain and speculation abounds. There are individuals within the government in Kiev who under these circumstances might resort to using force and escalate the situation further. It seems they feel trapped and are inclined to fight amidst the conflict. There could be a push for a ceasefire, but the challenge lies in dealing with a Russian government that appears to have given up on any engagement with the West. It's likely that he has a direct line of communication with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and possibly Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin. However, it's worth noting our past experiences, particularly with Milley, who previously leaked his rejected advice to the New York Times. In that instance, he suggested that Ukrainians had reached their limit and should consider negotiations. But his advice was dismissed, and he was compelled to express confidence in inevitable Ukrainian victory. Even if there is a direct line of communication, the ultimate decision-maker sits in the White House. It's doubtful that anyone in the current administration wants to concede to a significant mistake that has jeopardized Ukraine's very existence. I believe that those in Washington, and by those I mean almost everyone within the Beltway, have embraced the narrative that Russia is weak and incompetent with subpar soldiers and a feeble army. The prevailing sentiment is that we can overcome them, and there's a collective commitment to sticking with the Ukrainians, believing they can still outperform the Russians. The idea is to maintain the course and, if necessary, intervene to reinforce the Ukrainians. There's a notion of establishing a secure area in western Ukraine near the Polish border, possibly under the pretext of a no-fly zone to offer protection for retreating Ukrainian forces or refugees. The argument is that we can assert dominance over the Russians if needed. Drawing a historical parallel, it's suggested that President LBJ recognized the leverage he had with the United States Navy and Air Force over North Vietnam. However, the current situation with Russia is different. It's a pure continental land combat scenario, and the Russians hold the advantage. We lack significant leverage and our dependency on the Poles. While acknowledging their bravery is deemed an
Irrational move for an American actor. Well,
he seems to suggest that beyond the British Special Operations Forces, the rest of NATO doesn't have much to contribute. The force he mentioned in the interview, which Solutionary requested, surpasses the size of any European army. Far can they realistically send? The answer, as he sees it, is not much. Additionally, NATO has already depleted a significant portion of its ammunition and weapon supplies. Most of the excess has either fallen into Russian hands or remains with the Ukrainians, who have faced equipment losses due to capture or destruction by the Russians. He draws parallels to ideas that were conceived by Hitler in the spring of 1944 for offenses in the East, despite the German army lacking the capability for such actions. This brings to mind the Battle of the Bulge, where the German army struggled to sustain itself even over short distances. While acknowledging the sincerity of the individual's beliefs, he strongly disagrees and asserts that the Russians have limited time to make significant preparations before the end of January.
I'd be provided.
Numbers regarding the situation are met with skepticism, given the historical lack of trustworthiness and information coming from Kiev. He emphasizes that none of the Ukrainians have been forthright about the conduct of the war, alleging prolific lies about various aspects. Specifically, the claim of having 700,000 troops,